इसलिए क्योंकि लगातार 2 लोकसभा चुनाव में कांग्रेस का प्रदर्शन शर्मनाक रहा है। कांग्रेस के अंदर कुछ आवाज बुलंद, सबसे ज्यादा सवाल कांग्रेस नेतृत्व पर उठाए हैं। टारगेट यकीनन राहुल गांधी। कौन सी बात किसको मिल रही है? इंटर पे लगाना और आज के समय में इंटरनल फोकस से हमारा काम नहीं होगा। हमारा फोकस एक्सटर्नल फोकस होना पड़ेगा। जनता की ओर हमें देखना पड़ेगा, जनता के पास हमें जाना पड़ेगा। वर्ष 2024 के चुनाव में इस चिंतन शिविर से एक बात तो समझ में आ गई कि कांग्रेस 2024 का लोकसभा चुनाव राहुल गांधी के चेहरे पर ही लड़े। यहाँ कुछ बड़े फैसले लिए। फैसला लिया गया कि अक्टूबर महीने में कांग्रेस जनता के बीच आएगी। इसमें खुद राहुल गांधी भी शामिल। बड़े नेता और नए नेता है जनता के बीच जाना होगा। यही कारण है कि अक्टूबर से कांग्रेस पार्टी देश भर में यात्रा करेगी और देश सभी नेता फैसला किया कि राहुल गांधी भारत भ्रमण करेंगे। मकसद देश की जनता कांग्रेस के टूट चुके सिंह को राहुल गांधी ये भारत भ्रमण ट्रेन, बस और ज्यादातर पैदल ही पूरा करेंगे। खुद राहुल गांधी ने भी कहा कि जनता के पास पहुंच जरूरी, जनता से जुड़ाव दिल से जोड़ना जरूरी। हमें बिना सोचे जनता के बीच में जवाब करने के लिए संकोच करने लगे। तो समझना चाहिए जो हमारा पहले कनेक्शन होता था। इस कार्यक्रम के बुनियादी है श्री राम जनता से टूटा है तो हमें एक्सेप्ट करना पड़ेगा।
सबको सादर जय जिनेंद्र। हमारे बीच में अनीता दीदी हैं। मैं हम सभी लोग तीन बार नमोकार मंत्र बोल के और फिर अनीता दीदी से निवेदन करेंगे कि वो हमको आशीर्वचन दें और इस कार्यक्रम का विधिवत मंगलाचरण। नमो अरिहंताणं नमो सिद्धाणं नमो आर्याणं नमो वज्जानं नमो लोये सप्तसाहुनं नमो अरिहंताणं नमो सिद्धाणं नमो आर्याणं नमो वज्जानं नमो लोये सप्तसाहुनं नमो अरिहंताणं नमो सिद्धाणं नमो आर्याणं नमो वज्जानं नमो लोये सप्तसाहुनं मंगलम भगवान वीरो मंगलम गौतमो गणी मंगलम कुंदंदाद्यो जैन धर्मोस्तु मंगलम। बोलो देवादिदेव महावीर भगवान की जय हो। संत शिव गुरु आचार्य विद्यासागर महाराज की जय हो। परम पूज्य परम तपस्वी विश्व गुरु आचार्य रत्न 108 ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज की जय हो। समस्त मुनि संघ की जय हो। दीदी अनीता दीदी से निवेदन करेंगे वो हमको आशीर्वचन दें।
बोले देवादिदेव 1008 श्री आदिनाथ भगवान की जय। बोलिए देवादिदेव 1008 श्री शांतिनाथ भगवान की जय। बोलिए संत शिरोमणि आचार्य श्री विद्यासागर जी महाराज की जय। बोलिए सराकोद्धारक षष्ठ पट्टाचार्य श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज की जय। बोलिए आचार्य श्री गे सागर जी महाराज की जय। परम पूजनीय आर्यता रत्न श्री दृढ़मती माता जी की जय। सुरपति सिर पर किरीट धारा, जिसमें मणिया कई हजारा, मणि की द्युति जल से धुलते हैं, प्रभु पद नमिता सुख फलते हैं। सम्मुख स्वादिक बसु गुण धारे, बसु विधि विधि रिपुनासन हारे, अनेक सिद्धों को नमता हूँ, इष्ट सिद्धि पाता समता हूँ। श्रुत सागर को पार किया है, सुच संयम का सार लिया है, सूरीश्वर के पद कमलों को, सिर पर रख लूं दुख दलनों को। उन मार्गी के मद तम हरते, मुख से प्रवचन झरते, उपाध्याय सुमरन कर लो, पाप नष्ट हो सुमरण कर लो। भक्ति भाव से चाहो शक्ति से, निर्मल कर कर निज मन को, बंधु पूजू अर्चन कर लूं, नमन करूं मैं जिन गण को। कष्ट दूर कर्म चूर हो, वो लाभ हो सदगति हो, वीर मरण हो जिन पद मुझको, मिले सामने सन्मति हो, मिले सामने सन्मति हो। बोलिए पंच परमेष्ठी भगवान की जय। कोई हंसकर जीता है, कोई रोकर जीता है, किंतु कीमत तो उस जीवन की है जो संयमी बन के संसार से विदा होता है। इस संसार में अगर कुछ निश्चित है तो वह मृत्यु ही निश्चित है। एक जिज्ञासु ने भविष्यवेत्ता से पूछा, क्या मैं धनवान बन सकता हूँ? उस भविष्यवेत्ता ने कहा, इस बारे में निश्चित नहीं बताया जा सकता है। यदि आप प्रतिदिन परिश्रम करते हो, अच्छी तरह से व्यापार करते हो, तो अवश्य ही धनवान बन जाओगे। जिज्ञासु ने दूसरा प्रश्न पूछा, क्या मैं भविष्य में अच्छा बलवान बन सकता हूँ? भविष्यवेत्ता ने कहा, यह निश्चित नहीं बताया जा सकता। यदि विवेक पूर्वक सुपाच्य भोजन करोगे तो निश्चित एक दिन बलवान अवश्य बन सकते हो। जिज्ञासु ने तीसरा प्रश्न पूछा, क्या मैं भविष्य में विद्वान बन सकता हूँ? भविष्यवेत्ता ने पुनः उत्तर दिया कि इस नहीं बताया है। यदि तुम मन लगा करके तन्मयता पूर्वक पढ़ो तो विद्वान बन सकते हो। चौथा प्रश्न पूछते हुए जिज्ञासु ने पुनः कहा, क्या मैं भविष्य में सच्चा धार्मिक बन सकता हूँ? भविष्यवेत्ता ने पुनः कहा, यह भी निश्चित नहीं कहा जा सकता है। यदि तुम धर्म को प्रज्ञा बुद्धि से तौलकर दृढ़ संकल्प के साथ जीवन में उतारोगे तो धार्मिक बन सकते हो। जिज्ञासु ने झुंझलाकर कहा, तो क्या आप मेरे भविष्य के विषय में कुछ भी नहीं बता सकते हो? भविष्यवेत्ता ने कहा, आपके बारे में एक बात मैं निश्चित रूप से बता सकता हूँ कि एक दिन तुम्हारी मौत अवश्य होगी, क्योंकि मौत के अतिरिक्त संसार में कुछ भी निश्चित नहीं है। इस प्रकार से उस भविष्यवेत्ता ने उस व्यक्ति से कहा, बंधुओं, संसार में अनंत काल से जन्म, जीवन और मृत्यु का घटनाक्रम चल रहा है। जब तक जन्म, जीवन और मृत्यु का चक्र चलेगा, तब तक आत्मा दुख और अशांति से ग्रस्त रहेगी। जीवन का सबसे बड़ा सच मृत्यु है। परम पूज्य आचार्य रत्न श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज श्री हमेशा अपने प्रवचनों में कहा करते थे कि व्यक्ति करिष्यामि करिष्यामि करिष्यामीति इति चिंतयेत्, मरिष्यामि मरिष्यामि मरिष्यामीति इति विस्मृतम, कि संसारी प्राणी मैं ये करूंगा ये करूंगा ये करूंगा, इसका तो हमेशा चिंतन करता है, स्मरण रखता है, परंतु एक दिन मुझे मरना है, इसको भूल जाया करता है। और पूज्य गुरुदेव हमेशा अपने प्रवचनों में यह भी कहा करते थे कि प्रत्येक व्यक्ति को अपनी अपनी तैयारी रखना चाहिए, क्योंकि जिंदगी एक सूरज है। आकाश में जब सूर्य का उदय होता है तो यह तय होता है कि सुबह से दोपहर और दोपहर से शाम तक रहेगा, लेकिन जिंदगी के सूरज के साथ ऐसा नियम नहीं है। यह जीवन रूपी सूर्य कभी भी अस्त हो सकता है। हर व्यक्ति आज मौत से भयभीत होता है, पर जैन दर्शन में जीवन जीने की कला के साथ साथ मृत्यु के कला भी सिखाई गई है, जिसको चाहे वो आचार्य समंत भद्र स्वामी की भाषा में कहें या अन्य आचार्यों की भाषा में कहें, जिसे सल्लेखना कहा गया है। वास्तव में सत प्लस लेखना इति सल्लेखना, समीचीन रूप से लेखन करना, शरीर को क्रस करने के साथ साथ कसायों को क्रस करना, यह सल्लेखना कहलाती है। जैन दर्शन में मृत्यु को महोत्सव का रूप कहा गया है। जिस प्रकार से वस्त्र जब जीर्ण शीर्ण हो जाया करता है तो व्यक्ति बड़े अच्छे से उत्साह के साथ नया वस्त्र लेकर ग्रहण करता है, ठीक इसी प्रकार से जैन दर्शन कहता है कि अहंकार को तोड़ने के लिए मृत्यु का दर्शन करना बहुत जरूरी है। परम पूज्य आचार्य रत्न श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज श्री हम सभी को एक संदेश दे करके गए हैं कि इस जीवन में मृत्यु का कोई भरोसा नहीं है, कब हमारे द्वार पर दस्तक दे, क्या पता मौत का कब पैगाम आ जाए, ना जाने जिंदगी की आखिरी शाम कब हो जाए। वास्तव में ये मौत न गाती है, न गुनगुनाती है, न चिल्लाती है, न रोती है। मौत जब लेने आ जाती है चुपके से लेकर चली जाती है, और यही घटित हुआ परम पूज्य आचार्य श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज श्री के साथ। कोई भी नहीं जानता था जहाँ पर वहीं पर एक जलता हुआ दीपक अचानक बुझ गया। निश्चित रूप से परम पूज्य आचार्य श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज श्री
ले लेना दीदी। अनम्यूट हो गया आपका
दीदी, अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा आपको। दीदी अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा, आपका म्यूट हो गया दीदी। म्यूट हो।
मुक्ति पद की प्राप्ति कर लिया करता है। हर व्यक्ति को प्रतिदिन ये भावना भाना चाहिए, हो वो ही लाओ सुगई गमनम समाहि मरणम जिन गुण संपत्ति होदु मध्यम। अंतिम समय भगवान का नाम लेते लेते जो इस शरीर से विदा हो जाया करते हैं, निश्चित रूप से उनका कम से कम 2-3 भाव, अधिक से अधिक 7-8 भाव शेष रह जाया करता है। परम पूज्य आचार्य श्री जी ने अनेक साधकों की समाधि कराई हुई है, और निश्चित रूप से बड़ी सावधानी के साथ छपक और निर्यापकाचारी का संबंध हुआ करता है। जो साधक सल्लेखना लिया करते हैं वो छपक कहलाते हैं, और जिनके निर्देशन में छपक की साधना होती है वह निर्यापकचारी कहलाते हैं। तो निश्चित संसार में मौत का कोई भरोसा नहीं है, इसलिए हम और आप सभी को प्रत्येक समय मौत का स्मरण करते हुए जीना चाहिए। यही भावना माना है, तेरी छत्र छाया भगवन मेरे सर पर हो, मेरा अंतिम मरण समाधि तेरे दर पर हो। और साथ ही साथ हर व्यक्ति को बचपन से छोटा समाधि मरण अवश्य पढ़ना चाहिए। क्योंकि कब द्वार पर मौत दस्तक दे दे पता नहीं है। ये जीवन रूपी माला के मोती कब बिखर जाएं, बिखरे इससे पहले हमें अपने जीवन में भक्ति का दीप जलाना होगा। चिता जले इससे पहले हमें अपनी चेतनता को जगाना होगा, तभी हम अपने नर जीवन को सफल सार्थक कर सकते हैं। भगवती आराधना जैसे ग्रंथों की रचना करके आचार्यों ने कहा है कि हर व्यक्ति को महोत्सव का रूप देने के लिए साधना करना चाहिए, क्योंकि मौत का अलार्म अगले पल कभी भी बज सकता है। तो निश्चित जैसे परम पूज्य आचार्य श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज श्री हम सभी को जाते जाते एक संदेश दे करके गए हैं। इस जीवन का फल भरोसा नहीं है, पर जाते जाते बहुत बड़ा संदेश। दीपावली के दिन आज 1 साल 6 महीना पूर्ण हो चुके हैं। परम पूज्य आचार्य श्री के सिद्धांतों को, उनके विचारों को, उनकी प्रेरणा हमारे साथ हमेशा है। उनके द्वारा बताया हुआ मार्ग हमेशा हमें सन्मार्ग की तरफ ले जाने में मदद करेगा। 27 मई को परम पूज्य आचार्य श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज श्री का 10वां आचार्य पदारोहण दिवस जहाँ तक ज्ञान तीर्थ क्षेत्र पर मनाया जाएगा। निश्चित रूप से प्रत्येक व्यक्ति को पूज्य गुरुदेव के श्री चरणों में समन समर्पित करना चाहिए। पंच कल्याणक प्रतिष्ठा महोत्सव के विषय में अभी एकदम फिक्स तो नहीं हुआ, पर नवंबर के महीने या फरवरी के महीने में ज्ञान तीर्थ क्षेत्र में जो 55.5 फुट ऊंची पहाड़ी पर 13.5 फुट ऊंची आदिनाथ भगवान की प्रतिमा हम सभी का परम कर्तव्य है गुरुदेव के अधूरे कार्य को पूरा करें, उनके स्वप्न को हम सभी मिलकर के साकार करें, तभी पूज्य गुरुदेव के प्रति सभी समर्पित करेंगे। इन्हीं भावनाओं के साथ अंतिम पता नहीं कब किसका क्या हो जाए, पता नहीं कब कौन विदा हो जाए, कल की आशा में जीने वालों पता नहीं कब जिंदगी की शाम हो जाए। तो जिंदगी की शाम हो इससे पहले निश्चित हमें अपने जीवन रूपी आंगन में भक्ति का दीप जलाना है। इन्हीं भावनाओं के साथ बोलिए परम पूज्य आचार्य रत्न श्री ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज की जय।
अनीता दीदी को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और बहुत ही सुंदर आचार्य सागर महाराज जी ने जैसे हमेशा ही कई समाधि कराई और बहुत खुद का आचार्य श्री का समाधि मरण हुआ। हम अभी ज़्यादा टाइम न लेते हुए निवेदन करूंगा आज के हमारे अध्यक्ष अभय गोयल साहब से, और इसके पहले के बीच में प्रोफेसर अशोक जैन ग्वालियर से हैं, वो गुरुदेव आचार्य ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज का चित्र अनावरण करेंगे। तो उनसे मैं निवेदन करूंगा कि वो चित्र अनावरण करें। परम पूज्य आचार्य ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज की जय हो, समस्त मुनि संघ की जय हो। करूंगा हमारे जस्टिस अभय गोयल साहब से कि वो आज के हमारे स्पीकर पुरुषोत्तम बिलमोरियो को आमंत्रित करें। और
हेलो, हेलो।
हाँ जी सर,
मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
हाँ आपकी आवाज आ रही है।
जी जी प्लीज। क्या प्रोफेसर बिलमोरिया जी जुड़ गए हैं क्या?
हाँ जी,
मैं हूँ यहाँ। नमस्कार।
ओके
जय जिनेंद्र।
ओके। क्या मुझे बोलना है पहले?
जी जी 2 मिनट 1 मिनट के लिए आप आमंत्रित कर देंगे।
जी जी। अगर ग्रेट सेंट आचार्य ज्ञान सागर जी महाराज के श्री चरणों में मेरा कोटि कोटि बंदन। आदरणीय अनीता दीदी, प्रोफेसर पुरुषोत्तम बिलमोरिया जी, संजीव सोगानी जी, SM जैन साहब जिनको मैं देख पा रहा हूँ, और भी उपस्थित सारे डिग्निटरीज। टुडे वी आर टॉकिंग ऑन ए वेरी important subject, that is dying with dignity, and Sallekha vis-a-vis euthanasia.
आपका सर म्यूट हो गया, अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा।
Two petitions are pending in the Supreme Court. One is which we have filed about the Sallekha. The division bench of the Rajasthan High Court earlier said, and they gave a decision against us, that Sallekha is a offence under the IPC, Indian Penal Code, under section 306, and it amounts to attempt to suicide. And that is also, and the another petition is pending before the Supreme Court, whether the euthanasia is permissible to the society, and whether it is an offense, and whether the Indian law permits to practice that. And is a very, very thin line between the, what we say it is Sallekha, the others may say that it's not a Sallekha, it's a euthanasia. So when we talk about the euthanasia, the simple meaning is that in so many countries it is prohibited. It is considered as to be a legal act, and in our country too, it is illegal. So that, and that has been confirmed by the one judgment of the division bench, judgment of the Rajasthan High Court. And then when so we have a very checkered history of our Tirthankaras, because it is said that all Tirthankaras passed their life through that process. They took a Sallekha Vrat. And for that purpose, when we were drafting that petition, the Ujla National President, the senior advocate in the Supreme Court, Sushil Jain Saab, then we found one book by Professor S. Shettar of Karnataka. He was professor in the Institute of Indian Art History, Karnataka University, Dharwad. And earlier he had written a book inviting death, and subsequently he changed it and wrote a book on pursuing death. We took the shelter of this book. Now our main task before the Supreme Court is to pursue and to convince the court to what is the purpose of Sallekha. It is a pious purpose. It is different from the euthanasia. It has a religious value. It has a legal value too. And Sallekha is different from the euthanasia. So we would like to hear Professor Bilmoria, who is a very reputed professor over the globe. Many times I have heard on this forum to Professor Bilmoria. He has a deep insight about the subjects, and he can naturally explain how it is normative, what is the bioethical and legal ramification of this issue. I have requested so many. I have also requested today our President, Sri Sushil Ji, to remain present in this conference so that we may hear Professor Vilmoria. And we may also have also requested Sanjeev Sogani Ji to please have a written paper, whatever he says, so that that will be helpful to us when we will argue the matter in the Supreme Court. Because we want now that our matter should be, either it should be heard before the matter of euthanasia, or it should not, or that the matter should not be decided earlier before we argue the matter about Sanlekhna. Because suppose if the Supreme Court says, no, euthanasia jo hai, is a illegal offense and it cannot be permitted, so that will have a direct reflection on the Sanlekhna Brat. At that time, because we are not party to in that petition. We will also examine how can we, whether we can be a party, we should be party to that petition so that we may protect our issue with that view. So I'll welcome Professor Vilmoria, who is a great scholar and he's a great scientist and also an orator who will give all insights of the subject, and he will enlighten us so that we will be able to have some path to frame our issues. Because when the purpose is that because we are reading that it is said that this Bratish Sanlekhna is our religious way of termination of life, and then is a very pious purpose. But merely saying would not be sufficient, or merely citing some of the our old scriptures, our old granths, or some of the sayings by our old saints. Mera khayal hai that will not be a sufficient purpose. But we have to press, we have to satisfy to the court that the samadhi is also samadhi, because they are Sanlekhna, unless a Jain judge is there on the board, it's difficult for them to understand what is Sanlekhna. So we have to teach them ABCD of the subject. What is Sanlekhna? What is Samadhi? What is difference between two? Samadhi, Sanlekhna. And then euthanasia. So that is a very tough job. And that's why I say that it's a very important talk. And we'll welcome Professor Vilmoria. We'll hear him. And he will give our he will give to us the importance of the subject, that how to choose our way and how to put up the matter before the court. This is my view to attending the talk today and saying that it's very, very important. So we'll welcome Professor Vilmoria and hear him. I welcome him on behalf of the Ujla. I welcome him on behalf of the entire persons of the legal fraternity, those who are joining this seminar today. Professor Vilmoria.
नमस्कार, जय जनेन्द्र। मैं आभारी हूँ ये निमंत्रण मुझको आया। जो जस्टिस अभी गोहिल ने कहा, कुछ बातों में उसको जवाब में दूंगा, लेकिन ज्यादा उस पर चर्चा मुझको करना है। जैसे आंसर तो नहीं है, ये रिफ्लेक्शंस बहुत समय से मैं कर रहा हूँ। लगभग 1985 में मेरा फर्स्ट पेपर आया हुआ था, द बायोएथिक्स ऑफ सलेखना रिपोर्ट फ्रॉम इंडिया। उसके बाद कई पेपर आए हुए हैं, लीगल रूलिंग्स आया हुआ था जो सुसाइड पर, उसके विषय में। तो वो कैसे लग रहा है सलेखना या संतारा के साथ, वो भी पेपर आए हुए। और फिर बाद में dignified dying, euthanasia, debates with Western bioethical traditions, legal traditions, पर मैं लिखा हूँ, छापा हुआ पेपर। तो फिर उसके बाद ये राजस्थान हाई कोर्ट का जजमेंट आया, तो उसके बाद ये अभी ये पेपर में लिख रहा हूँ, ये चैप्टर है बुक में। सो आई विल कंटिन्यू, ज्यादा तो इंग्लिश में ही बोलेंगे। तो मुझे स्क्रीन शेयर आप होस्ट बना देंगे संजीव जी?
बना दिया मैंने। You
अच्छा,
are co-host already.
I'm the host, okay.
Yeah.
Right. So दिखा रहा है या you can?
Yes, yes.
Okay, बढ़िया. So this one, this paper is on. So please, if everybody could mute themselves. क्योंकि मैं दूर हूँ, मैं अमेरिका में बैठा हुआ हूँ, तो कुछ इंटरनेट स्टेबल नहीं है, तो कुछ भी जब आवाज आती है तो ये हिलने लगता है मेरा स्क्रीन शेयरिंग माने स्लाइड। तो लेट्स प्रोसीड। ओके, तो कई बातें हैं इसमें। यूथनेशिया भी है, जैसे जस्टिस जी ने कहा ये सलेखना यूथनेशिया में लगाए या उसको अलग से देखना चाहिए, लेकिन वो भी एक इशू है। कुछ ओवरलैप है, कुछ अलग भी है, कुछ भेद भी है उसमें, कुछ सामान्य भी है। तो यूथनेशिया नॉर्मेटिव, एथिकल, नॉर्मेटिव माने मॉरल, बायोएथिकल, लीगल रेमिफिकेशंस, ठीक है ना? तो terms. So Indians have long contemplated. I have to put these screens aside. So Indians have long contemplated how one should die. What is the most noble or dignified and enlightened way of dying? किस तरह मृत्यु को लेना है? So there is more in the Hindu tradition, Prayopavasena. So this is the termination made in the ethical prescriptions adopted to terminate one's life in conditions, extenuating conditions, excessive circumstances such as famine, pestilence, natural disasters, and so forth. So there were some prescriptions given for that. So Santara is the voluntarily embracing death, where there is the autonomy of the individual is recognized, and consent, and all these bioethical principles, which I will come to in a moment. So the idea is that it's voluntary rather than involuntary. In other words, it's an autonomous action on the part of the individual concerned who has come to some stage where prolonging the life is not desirable. Okay, so Salekhana, of course, is the practice through which Santara is achieved, namely the final fast. The practice of an extended fast, graduated withdrawal from the urges of life and desisting from intake of foods and liquids, resulting in a peaceful passing away. So Samadhi Marana is the death in meditation. As was said, our Tirthankaras adopted some kind of yogic practice, meditation, inward withdrawal, rising above the senses, rising above the pain of the body as well. So in that sense, achieving a harmless death. So it's called death in meditation. I see these are known terms for people. So, however, there are, of course, court rulings that have somehow have in some parts exacerbated the situation, the debates and so forth, because of the bugbear, if you like, the hovering rulings which have remained in the Indian books, at least until recently, from the Indian Penal Code, or by and large in many countries where suicide is not considered a desirable act, morally or legally. So there was a case of a public vendor whose license application to sell vegetables on this street in his cart was revoked by the city's administrator. So he set himself on fire in public. where he was arrested, charged by police with criminal offense under Section 309 of the Penal Code. That was a very famous case that came to the courts under Maruti Sripath Dabu versus the state of Maharashtra. So in this case, the judges said, well, you know, there is a possibility. There's situations where suicide is not immoral. It's not, and therefore the legality of Section 309 should be questioned. You know, the extent of its application, if not its juridical power. And then, of course, a lot of countries by that time had outlawed, not so much outlawed, but ruled out the criminality of suicide, considering it more to be a health or a mental condition. That, you know, there are situations where somebody is mentally distressed and so forth, and they may resort to suicide. So should be treated as a health issue, medical issue, rather than a legal issue. So that was about 1986. But this was read. The anxiety was expressed by Justice Tukul.
यूथनेसिया ऊपर से मम्मी हाँ
जी
यूथनेसिया ऊपर से यूथनेसिया ऊपर से यूथनेसिया એટલે
Yeah. માણસને મારી નાખે.
So Justice Tukul also was a bit apprehensive that Jain practice is vulnerable and could be seen to fall under the IPC Section 309 and also 306, which is about assisting someone or coercing someone to suicide. Okay. So in other words, the abetting suicide, and it carries a jail term. The Apex Court, as the courts rather, compared the acts of attempted suicide to euthanasia in medical texts, but also on the other side to sati, that practice where someone is coerced, namely the widow is coerced into self-immolation. So there is tension. How do the courts judge through this? So there were the famous cases that were brought to the courts about how to deal with this and what provisions there are in the Constitution, in the Indian Constitution, that may provide for this. So I'll come to that in a moment when we consider the Articles 19 to 25, liberty and so forth. But right now, the issue was brought because the charges were brought under the IPC, so they had to deal with the IPC. So the bioethics of euthanasia in India. So consider other cases. I mentioned sati, but there's another case practiced by the Hindu community. And this was a case in Tamil Nadu. It was reported here in the United States, where the ailing and suffering from debilitating pain people are led to their death with a portion known as Thalai Kothal. Thalai Kothal is literally translated to Thalai, meaning head, and Kothal giving bath. So this is practiced in more than 40 villages in India among the locals. It is known as the last bath. So interesting, the last fast, this is last bath, snan. So the aged are massaged with these special blends of oil made of coconut, castor, sesame, and so forth, and then given cold bath put to death. This drops the temperature of the already weak person. To accelerate, he or she is made to drink glasses of tender coconut water, which further worsen the condition of this person, and the person dies due to high fever and renal failure within a few days. So the question on euthanasia arises: how have most Indians been dealing with this issue? What is their response to the question of, suppose this practice can be called euthanasia, but a lot of people resist to call this euthanasia. Well, then what kind of practice is it if it's not a practice about good death, bringing about a dignified death because the quality of life is being challenged? Hindus don't have any other category other than other than Prayoveshana, right? All right, so we should move to the next debate, next issue. So, or is this practice a case of concealed suicide? Well, both suicide and euthanasia are not legal in India, at least for the period that I'm talking about, is the 1980s and 1990s. So is this practice a case of concealed suicide, namely Salekhana? Now we coming back to the Santara practice. No, suicide is an importunate act committed under emotional duress while confused or in disturbed frame of mind. Is this a case of what is called assisted suicide or assisted death, medically assisted death? One might say the Tamil Nadu practice, the Thaikonarudal, can be regarded as a medically assisted death, although there are no doctors involved in that, but it is an assisted death rather than assisted suicide, because these people are not necessarily under, mental disturbed conditions. They are medically at a point where they are going to die in any case. So this is helping them die peacefully and in dignified form. In a sense, that is what euthanasia amounts to. People are very afraid of the term euthanasia, but in fact, seen in that light, it's not any different to forms of assisted suicide where there is least harm given to the individual, and there is autonomy of a decision being made and consent of the patient under consideration. So now, is this a case of euthanasia, voluntary or involuntary? No, generally a medical professional administers a lethal agent to the incumbent or turns off, if you like, the ventilation system, that which is keeping the individual alive, right? So there is a direct intervention by the medical, which is why it's called medically assisted. Whereas in fasting, in Santara, there is no such interference. There's complete autonomy, yes, and consent, yes, but there is no external intervention. No one is assisting the person necessarily. However, as compared to suicide, this is a heavily debated issue because one could still say that it falls into suicide, right? That one is then voluntarily committing suicide. So how do you negotiate these issues within the debate? I once had organized a conference, and I think Jagmal Jain was there in Banaras, where we had a lot of Jain community members, monks and nuns present. And I said, well, perhaps this could be considered a form of euthanasia because even though there is no intervention, there is assistance being provided by the community. The community is encouraging, not so much encouraging, but monitoring the situation. And the preceptor, the acharya, is the one who is going to give the vow, the vrat, that now you take this fast, now you take that fast, now you take that fast, and now you stop drinking. So there's a withdrawal of, if you like, the life support system. Now you stop taking food, now you stop drinking, now you may go. So this could be considered a form of assisted death because it meets all the conditions that bioethics sets down on when medically assisted death is permissible. So, but no, the community resisted and said, no, this is not suicide. This is not medically assisted. There is no medical intervention. It is purely voluntary. It can be involuntary in the case of a child who is not able to give consent, of course, and is in a debilitating condition. Okay, or someone who is in comatose, right? That, say a Jain member of the community fell into comatose, and then no directive was left by the person, so somebody else, the family, has to make a decision. So that's again assisted, involuntarily assisted. But people have argued that no, Salekhana is not suicide either. So it doesn't fall into euthanasia, nor does it fall into suicide. So so here is a Kim Jog, a colleague of mine, an American scholar, writing, nowhere in the Jain tradition is one forced to seek Salekhana. And de facto, it is quite the opposite, where steps must be made to qualify for Salekhana. So in other words, it's a qualitative decision making rather than a quantitative. It's not about how much longer you're going to live and so forth. It is the case. It is that I think the person, I'm ready to leave my body now. So, but the conditions have to be met for Salekhana, and it is only allowed for 4 situations: unavoidable calamity, taken captive in such a way as not to be allowed to keep one's vows, caught in a great famine that would prevent observing dietary restrictions, old age with debilitating handicaps that would prevent observance of vows, and terminal illness from which death is imminent. So these are the conditions under which Salekhana would be permissible. But of course, when you actually look at it, the old age with debilitating handicaps and terminal illness from which death is imminent are the very conditions under which euthanasia is practiced, right? So the medical profession and countries where euthanasia has been made legal has actually called voluntary medically assisted death, or sometimes even I think in Belgium or Holland, it's actually called medically assisted suicide. But there are certain conditions laid down, and those conditions have to be guaranteed and confirmed by medical professionals, right? Not members of the community, not cultural cohorts, counterparts, and the family will be consulted, but sometimes the family's reticence might be overlooked by the medical profession if they go to court on such matters. So the old age with debilitating condition, terminal illness, under conditions, and those conditions are very strict and very rigid. It's not, it's not a free for all. The nurses and the doctors attending cannot just pull the plug, as it were, on a whim or on their own decision. It's a process. There is an ethics committee in the hospital as well that goes through, looks at the situation, each situation in its own terms, one by one, rather than a principle, general principle. Now we come to moral argument. So this is the, the dharma position on this. In some ways, dharma, but it's also more universal moral principles. In the West, it's not dharma that applies to that, but there are certain moral principles, what they call deontological or consequential, sometimes is also used, like utilitarianism and so on, or the virtue of the particular act in. Now, this is the moral question. To prolong one's suffering is to actively create suffering, which is in direct contrast to the principle of absolute non-violence. Would everybody please mute, because my internet is not stable and it takes up a lot of power from the internet when there is so much noise going on in the background. So the prolonged one's suffering is to actively create suffering, which is in direct contrast to the principle of absolute non-violence. So one could say from the dharma position, from the Jain position, that Santhara is actually a practice that reduces violence rather than increases violence, because to keep a person alive is actually a violence, doing violence to their being. They're being withheld from progress into nirvana or to the arihant condition, and there's a lot of medication being given which are killing bugs, bacteria in the body, right? So one is being reduced to a vegetative state, which qualitatively is not a very desirable thing. You may have one more life being extended quantitatively, but in this case, it's not quantity that matters, it's the quality. And there can be extraneous adversities as well. So this could fall under moral argument. Contingent circumstances where no escape is possible, as we said earlier on in the case of calamities and so forth, or even in medically advanced cases, medically advanced illness cases where there is no escape possible. a higher social end might be served or preserved. So what would be the higher social end? Well, the burden on the community is lessened. So the person, who's kept alive is a burden to the family, is burden to the hospitals, burden to the healthcare system, such as it is. It's the healthcare system in America and in India are not the best, not the optimal, not like in European countries or places in like Australia or New Zealand, England. So it's a weight, if you like. It's a burden. It's a non-beneficial, as we would call it, burden on the medical system. Or in the case of fire, drowning, wild animal lost in wilderness, and so forth. So these are conditions that people have considered in the past, in the Hindu tradition also. Putting one's life at risk to save another life. That could be a moral reason. Famine, mass flooding, devastation, avalanches, pestilence, those could be conditions as well. Should one survive any of this, one is obliged to resume a normal existence. But if one is not going to survive, then a moral consideration comes in, right? It may be incumbent upon the individual and those around to succumb to the inevitable. So continued. There can be terminal roga, diseases, and illness that is irreversible and debilitating, or natural death is imminent, right? Ethical points and stipulations. Terminal fasting is rational, whereas suicide is irrational. So that's a case that can be made in the case that's coming before the Supreme Court, that Sallekhana is not suicide. That has to be ruled out, even though Section 309 has been rescinded, has been struck out. However, because there is some assistance involved, there's a community involved in that. The people around, there's the acharyas involved, there's the giving of the precept, not giving the food, because a person in debilitating condition cannot go to the kitchen or the pantry and get food. They depend on us, on the people around giving food. So somebody could say, well, you're assisting this person to commit suicide because you're not giving the person food. So that's a very important. So Section 306 still can be used in such cases. If Section 309 cannot be used, because how can you punish a person who's already undertaking suicide, right? So terminal fasting is rational, whereas suicide is irrational. Proper care has been given to the body and mind. Everything has been done to address the illness. All treatment is ineffective and pain continues. Yoga and meditational exercises have been employed. So that's a little more dignified process. Responsibilities and obligations have been met, does not jeopardize the interests of others, and does not harm others. No one else is responsible for the active process. In other words, there's complete autonomy and consent. The societal burden will be lightened, and the burden on the community will be lightened. Forgiveness towards all sentient beings and consent from the Guru has been obtained. In a disposition towards death, that spiritual comportment could be enhanced, right? So spiritual comportment, in other words, one is permitted to, one is being permitted to continue, and actually it's made possible to continue. In other words, one is being enabled to continue the spiritual path that had been put on a pause because of this condition, right? So one is not progressing spiritually when one's in that condition. Now, there's still some curious questions come up. So as I said, euthanasia literally means good death. And it goes back to Aristotle, who talked about good death. Not in the context of suicide or taking life or so. It's just naturally good death. What would make for a good death, Aristotle asked. But nowadays we talk of three kinds of good death where the death is an intervention, either by the individual themselves or by other individuals concerned. Voluntary, involuntary, and non-voluntary, three of which can be active or passive. Active meaning the person himself or herself undertakes their death, in other words, taking some medication or in some, in some cases it could be some kind of poison, or in other cases it can be just withdrawal from taking food. So that is voluntary as well. Involuntary is when some other person interferes, or passive is when one is not in a position to make a decision and somebody else makes a decision. And that's sort of, there's a lot of complicated, a lot of permutations here: voluntary, active, involuntary, active, non-voluntary. We won't go into a lot of those details that people in the field of euthanasia argue a lot about, but it can be active or passive, right? I think in the case of Sallekhana, it's probably more active because the person willfully, as it were, on their own will, makes the decision and undertakes the fasting. So that's an active act of fasting, right? In the case of a child and so forth, it could be different. Non-voluntary is a case where, the person is not in a position to make a decision, so it could be in comatose and so forth, and therefore it's actually in a passive state, and other people will be making the decisions for that person. So when a vow of terminal fasting is conferred on someone by their spiritual advisor, Acharya, does this not implement their preceptor in a virtually active role, like a doctor, right? Do the individuals in the proximity of the incumbent play no role in the process? In other words, the community, the sangha, the people who've been assisting the monk or the nun or the individual through illness phase, right? The spiritual community, they could be said to be practicing a form of active passive euthanasia. In other words, seeing the person die. So passive is letting the person die without doing anything when they could be doing something, right? So that's passive. That's called letting die. Letting someone die. Should they not be trying to keep the person alive? So that's the intervention that the Hippocratic Oath requires doctors to actually perform. In other words, they must keep a person alive unless there is a law or moral consideration that can override that Hippocratic Oath. So if a minor were to practice a terminal fasting, would parents' consent be required? And if so, is that not a form of active passive euthanasia? In the event of one who is unconscious or in a coma, can be given Sallekhana. This would be a case of involuntary fasting. Would it therefore qualify as active passive euthanasia? Does an individual who is terminally ill or severely disabled, for example, being deaf or blind, who contributes almost nothing to their community, place a burden on the society? If so, do they have a right to continue living? What responsibility does society have towards this person? Does the community have a right to decide if such individuals should not continue to exist? So, it can get very complicated in these situations. We're not just talking about a person who is conscious and can make a decision. We're also talking about people who are not able to make a decision. So who's going to make the decision in those cases? Who's going to give the Sallekhana? And are they in that situation immune from the judgments of the governance of IPC, the remaining sections, or if say euthanasia were to be decriminalized, suppose in Kerala, which is a very highly Christian state, as in the case of abortions and so forth, they could say, we're going to decriminalize euthanasia. Now, this case that just come before us is a case of euthanasia. Therefore, there is a criminal case against this community rather than the individual. So we have to be very careful of how these arguments are going to be made. Oh, okay. Right. So a legal argument and counter argument. So has Santara any sanction under personal law? But of course, the personal law of the Hindus, as Jains, do not have their separate personal law. Like Parsis and Buddhists, they come under Sikhs, they come under Hindu. But Hindu code bill is very secular, has been secularized, Hindu code bill. And so sanctions from Manusmriti or traditional sanction, even the Pravoyov Prayovyasena, does not apply because it's not deemed to be juridical or judiciable. And so is Santara protected by Article 21, freedom of religious practice? So from 19 to 25, you have all these wonderful articles in the Constitution. The justice could speak to them. Freedom of religious practice, of gathering, life of liberty, right to livelihood, right to life and livelihood. I'm going to say something in the next one there. So under those provisions, any of the fundamental rights or all of them together. Right? So is there any constitutional sanction or protection for Santara? Does the right to livelihood, the right to life, entail negative right to end one's life, right to die? Now, this was a case that had, of course, been considered in Maruti Sripad versus the state of Maharashtra, but more so also later on, after it was actually overturned by the Andhra Pradesh court. They said, no, the right to life provision in the Constitution, the fundamental rights, does not entail right to die. But then that was overruled again in P. Rathiman versus the Union of India in 1994, and more so in the landmark judgment of Aruna Sonbag versus the Union of India. But yes, so there's a lot of legal debate that has gone on about this particular reasoning, which is legitimate. I mean, many times negative rights are actually derived from positive rights set out, in the Constitution or United Declarations for Human Rights, or in the American Bill of Rights. So the fundamental right to life and property should include the freedom of conscious individuals to decide their own death, where right to livelihood and life is thwarted, threatened, or withheld. Hence, Santara is justified act in law. So it's an act that can be justified in law in virtue of the non-ultra vires state of the fundamental rights. So the Rajasthan High Court plea and judgment do not recognize it as a bona fide religious practice. So, it doesn't come under any of the fundamental rights or protections or personal law protections, religious practices protection, nor under the right to livelihood, the liberty that the individual has. So it would not be considered, at least the Rajasthan High Court judgment has not been considered to be a viable practice under the articles. I meant 19 to 25 in the Indian Constitution, but is considered to be a socially cohesive practice on a par with sati. And now this is the plea that was actually brought by the people, Nitin Jain, I think, who took the case to the Rajasthan High Court and said, this is not a religious practice, does not have any sanction, any justification under the Indian Constitution, the Fundamental Rights Bill, or directives or anything like that. And therefore, it's akin to sati, which is banned, and therefore, this should really be outlawed, and otherwise criminalized. So the High Court did not say it should be criminalized, but upheld the plea that, this practice is not religious and should not be pursued. Of course, the Supreme Court put a stay on that until it's going to be heard further. So the legality issue, this is the further legality. So historically, Sallekhana has been ruled illegal. That's, since the arrival of the British, because of the penal code and so forth. Though it was practiced all along. As the justice mentioned, the Tirthankaras all took fasting, and it's been practiced for generations rather, for centuries. But under the yoke of the British rule, it suddenly becomes a no-no, right? Although no case was brought against, so this is to be noted, no case was brought against Sallekhana Santara. It was the fear that if this case ever comes up, and I had predicted that this will be challenged sooner or later in the courts, and that Justice Tukol's argumentation may not hold, and it didn't hold in the Rajasthan High Court. So I was right about that, and I have been looking for other ways in which arguments to protect Sallekhana could be made. And this is the, this is where we're at, the crossroads. We're at this crossroad at the moment. We can't be too confident because we don't actually know how the courts are going to, people sitting on the bench are going to reason, just as we didn't know how the Ram Janmabhoomi case was going to come out, okay? So Jains argue that the practice of terminal fasting, being a religiously ordained practice, derives its sanction from the constitutional protection of religious freedom and the state's recognition of equality among religions. This is a strong argument. This is one argument that should be made, right? However, does the constitutional protection of religious freedom mean that all social and institutional constraints are to be suspended, even when there are sensitivity and doubts about the extent to which a particular practice does or does not fall within the boundaries of a religion, which it is left to determine by itself? So now, after making that argument, the courts can turn around and say, yes, but what are the constraints on this? And are we going to go over the constraints? It's a sensitive matter. What if people say this is a form of suicide? What if people say this is euthanasia, which is not legal, and so on and so forth, right? How much protection can we give within the boundaries of religion? Then why don't we allow sati, right? And so forth. Yes, and there's another example that will come in a minute. So, the counter arguments, the sort of legal counterfactuals are quite many here. We have to be worried about. Few more questions. Could an esoteric group practice human sacrifice, invoking religious imperatives and a secular respect for personal law of the Hindu community and claim legal immunity? For example, sacrificing human beings or excessively sacrificing animals. And don't remember that these are sentient beings we're talking about. Human beings are not the only sentient beings. Any harm on a sentient being is a harm, is ahimsa, and it karma creating and so forth. So, but in law, of course, karma and that kind of ahimsa is not really the issue. But yes, Maneka Gandhi, to her credit, actually brought the case in court against animal slaughter, rather than animal sacrifice, or animal slaughter, on the grounds that it is actually or the same as the practice of human sacrifice of animals, which is prohibited. What is the difference? The slaughter is actually harming sentient beings excessively for the purpose of human consumption and so forth. And, that was a very strong argument that she had made. And so restrictions were placed rather than, animal slaughter was not outlawed, but very many restrictions were being laid on that. So in other words, if such reasoning can be applied to terminal fasting within Jainism, why cannot the same rational argument be applied and used to justify the act of sati, right? Or that of voluntary human sacrifice? Now, these are very strong counter arguments that are going to be made. Don't think that they're not going to be made, because they have been made. They've been made in the cases that we've considered. The Maruti Srupat case. It has been brought in the Rathinam case. You look at it. Sometimes obiter dicta, but the judges went as far as Durkheim to consider what Durkheim thought about suicide, but also the cases that come within the Indian subcontinental case, Johar and so forth, right? So they were not blind to these what I call counterfactuals. So could and should this be extended to children? Are children able to provide consent to the practice of terminal fasting or volunteer themselves to be sacrificed? In Belgium and the Netherlands, the minimum age requirement for voluntary euthanasia is 12 years old. Well, that's not entirely voluntary, it's actually non-voluntary, not involuntary, non-voluntary, where the decision is made between the individual, in this case, the child, minor, consent, and the parents. So that's called non-voluntary. But yes, so where do we stop? What if a young person, 12-year-old wants to take Sallekhana? What do you do? Okay. All right. So now finally, so these are the questions. So arguments against decriminalization. So the Supreme Court in India decriminalized suicide in 1984, but it was soon recognized as a crime again in 1996. In some of those judgments then rescinded again in 2009 by the Act of Parliament. However, those who abet any kind of coercive suicide are subjected to IPC 306 prescription. Now, this is something like, this is what Rajiv Dhawan, well known in the Indian case, who also stood for the claims on the Ram Janmabhoomi. Somebody putting a tick there. I'm sorry. This is not. I did not put that yellow tick. I don't know who did that. It's not proper. So he said, there is a moral question we need to address. Can we watch someone die? If suicide is celebrated with religious fervor, does that make it better? While there is a constitutional duty to save life, people do commit suicide. He says, my concern is that those who survive should not be prosecuted and treated as criminals. He says, the concern is why they should not be prosecuted. Decriminalize suicide, but not abetment to suicide, right? Okay, so those people who actually have been abetting the suicide, abettors are criminals. A slow and painful death is surely an abomination. A slow death by fasting, abetted and celebrated by co-religionists, the religious community, is abhorrent and affront to humanity. So, you know, I mean, you can imagine in this the judgment that's going to be handed down, or the case when it's considered, when the bench hears the case, someone like Rajiv Dhawan making this argument that we should not decriminalize suicide, and therefore actually abetment to suicide, right? So the people abetting Salekana are the ones that should be held responsible morally, legally, and there's no bioethical case here, they will say. You do not know who the amicus curiae is going to be, people who are going to be brought to the court. So you have to actually make an argument against, you know, against someone like Rajiv Dhawan, who's going to who are going to make this sort of argument. So, and remember, this is not just about suicide. He is actually responding to the High Court to the rescinding of Section 309. Right? This Supreme Court just allows suicide, and yes, and it was in relation to the Rajasthan judgment. So you can see that there's all kinds of things involved. The rescinding of 309, Santara Rajasthan judgment, Sati, Roop Kanwar, Sharmila Badana Devi, and so forth. So he's considering a whole spate of cases where abetting suicide might have been implicated, right? Certainly in the case of Sati. So my own observations and this is my last slide. This is my, this is a long paper and I've just summarized. This is my summary. There has been a shift in the pan-Indian attitude towards suicide. We just saw that as presenting more of a health, maybe mental, rather than just legal challenge. So suicide itself can be left aside. However, as Rajiv Dhawan points out, the courts are not going to take lightly if any kind of abetment or any kind of encouragement is involved in what they might, or the police or the legal authorities might deem to be a form of suicide. Because they don't know, they don't care about a religious practice. Sati is a religious practice, yes, but it's a form of suicide, and it is a form of abetted suicide. There's a coercion involved. And so, Roop Kanwar case is the one that highlighted this issue, and a parliamentary act was passed. The first one in 1829, but then recently in our times as well, after the Roop Kanwar case. So this development of a more favorable outlook towards one's right to die, in conjunction with the decision of the Indian courts within the last 2-3 decades, have allowed the Jain community to witness encouraging legal strides towards the legalization of Salekhana, or at least legal tolerance. Until now, there has been legal tolerance, and that's what the practice of Salekhana has been riding on, right? There's been legal tolerance, but when this tolerance becomes intolerance in the present Indian context, there's a lot of issues that are towards which there is intolerance, okay? So this is a question. However, there remain certain obstacles that challenge both the sanguine bioethical basis as also as legitimacy under law. And now in the Princeton Center for Human Values, where all kinds of favorable things are being said and done about euthanasia, people like my friend Peter Singer is involved and so on. I put up the case of Salekhana. I said, let's consider this as a case in bioethics. They were not interested. They're not at all interested. They're interested. Peter Singer, to his credit, published my first paper on Salekhana, yes, in the Journal of Bioethics. But when it comes to further issues, about taking it under the if you like, the purview, of euthanasia or debates within that, there's not as great an interest. Even though I say this is a spiritually dignified, a very humanistic approach, more than the clinical, the medical approach that's practiced in the West, there's also, they turn a blind eye to that. Not all of them, some of them do. Anyway, due to the processes of the right, the actual practice, coupled with standing laws such as Section 309, the ineffectual decriminalization of Section 309, and I say ineffectual because it still can be used. It is still used in some cases. There remains the moot point that Salekhana cannot be practiced as prescribed in Jain teachings without transgression of the law, right? So that's really where we're at the moment. Even aside from the Rajasthan High Court ruling, which has been stayed by the Supreme Court, the position stands at that. It can be, and it is, as Rajiv Dhawan points out, a transgression of the law. It's just that the law seems to be tolerant about this at the present time. But these are obstacles that we have to overcome. I'm not saying that they're impossible. I'm saying that that's what is standing in the way. So I'm a philosopher. I can only point out what the problems and issues are, not what the solutions are necessarily. Okay, one last slide. One last slide. Okay. Yeah. So the Supreme Court, in its full judgment, might offer a surprise. This is an anticipation. It might offer a surprise, an absolute sanction. On what grounds, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe on religious grounds, maybe on suicide grounds, legitimate suicide grounds, maybe on euthanasia grounds. We don't know exactly how it's going to look upon this. Even though euthanasia is not legal, but that's the point at which euthanasia may become legal in India. That's something to look forward to. Netherlands, Scandinavian country, I say that in a moment. So still, given the Supreme Court stay order of the Rajasthan High Court, voluntary organizations such as the Dharma Jagaran Mandala, so there's the Dharma Jagaran Mandal in Maharashtra, might with impunity continue with home and hospital visits to help the Jain individual diagnosed with terminal illness to come to terms with the impending death and his potential for auspiciousness. So I say that there is a tolerance to their practice at the present time. It's a tolerance, it's not a sanction, it's not saying it's therefore legal and legitimate and so forth, but it's recognized for its bioethical, medical, qualitative contribution to this situation. They may even prescribe the vow of a definitive last right and provide palliative care and counseling to the patient as well as to the family. That's the mandala, the Dharma Jagaran Mandala. And they will provide support of both lay and religious sanghas. They also provide the support to both lay and religious sanghas and use the support from the religious sanghas as well. There the matter stands, for now at least. This would align it with the enlightened euthanasia, align it with थोड़ा आप शांत रहो this would align it with enlightened euthanasia made legal in several states of US and in many Scandinavian European countries, including in Oceania, in the Pacific, the state of Victoria in Australia, and in New Zealand. So why would we not want to make in tandem an argument for euthanasia in India? Because it's practiced and it's made legal in many countries of the world. India has fallen behind in that. But of course, the Jain community will still say, I gather, that we don't want our practice to be lumped with this clinical, medically assisted death, medically assisted suicide practice. Ours is a completely religious practice, and therefore we should look for its sanction under the Indian Constitution, under the fundamental rights, and so on and so forth. Well, I really don't know. I'm not a justice. I'm not a high court or supreme. I'm not a judge. I have a legal background, yes, but only that of a lawyer or a professor of law. So I don't really know how the reasoning is going to happen. But I think that time is right now for India to actually debate the issue of euthanasia, and this might be the moment to bring it to the forefront, and perhaps this might be the, as they say, the saving grace of the impasse that we are at the moment with Salekhana, with Santara. Thank you. Dhanyavad. So here ends my talk, and I hand it over to Justice Abhi Gohil. Well, I think Sanjeev perhaps should take over from here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Purushottam.
Hello.
And I would request, please, Abhay Gohil Sahab, you may ask someone has the questions, or can you enlighten?
Thank you, Professor. अच्छा आपने म्यूट कर रखा है क्या?
नहीं, आपका आवाज आता है।
आवाज तो आ रही, मेरे शायद पिक्चर नहीं आ रहा, वीडियो मेरा म्यूट कर रखा है।
अच्छा नहीं, वो मैं I'll just.
Thank you, Professor Bilmoria. You have given a very thought-provoking and very lengthy and the all aspect of the matter in your article and in your talk. Really, what I think now in this matter, when I was hearing your talk, that one of the very important principle of jurisprudence of criminal law is that the mens rea, the mindset of criminality, so that can be a very distinguishable point between the suicide and the Sanlekhana, and we can argue on that point that there is no criminality in the Sanlekhana, there is no mindset of criminal nature, there is no mens rea. Mens rea is very important, because in 90% of the criminal cases we are always arguing that the presence of mens rea while committing offense by the party. If there is no mens rea, then the question is over, whether it is it would be a punishable offense or not. So in this case, what is my view is that there is no mens rea is available, or a criminal mindset or criminality, question of criminality is available in a question of practicing Sanlekhana. And then where is in a suicide or in even euthanasia, there is a mindset of criminality. Up to some extent, we can say that the person was having a criminal mind. There's these two sections, section 306 and 309, have also been drafted on the same lines. One is about the abatement of suicide. So that is the offense if somebody abates a person, that you commit suicide, or you do this, or you finish your life or terminate your life by this way, in this manner.
Mhm, mhm.
And the secondly is attempt to commit suicide, 309. So naturally, when you with a criminal mind, if you want without any religious purpose, without any object, if you are finishing your life, terminating your life, so that is if you are attempting to commit suicide, that's the presence of the even in those cases where someone would argue about the presence of, in the case of 306 or 309, if someone is prosecuted, then that has to be the line of argument that the presence of mens rea is available or not. So I think in this case, we have got a good point today to distinguish between the Sanlekhana, which is the euthanasia, that there must be a absence of criminal mind, absence of mens rea, and that can be a good defense. I think you can also consider this aspect of the matter while elaborating your argument or your paper. And but really, you have made a good labor in preparing the talk, and you have covered all aspects of the from the bioethical ground, from the legal aspect, from the ramifications and all that. That how this subject, and you have also cited the 2-3 judgments which are very important. But in all these judgments, the court did not cover the right to end life under the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution of India.
No,
which
no,
is
no.
the-
That's not
which is-
true. No, no, it did in exactly the cases of the Marathi Sripad Dabu versus the state of Maharashtra, and more so in the P. Rathinam versus Union of India, 1994, and most notably in the Aruna Sonberg versus the Union. Those were based on the right to die. Right to die.
Right to die. But they have not covered under Article 21 of the Constitution of India, which speaks about the right to life. What I mean to say.
Sorry, I'm not following you.
I disturb you, sir.
It is based on Article 21, right to life and livelihood. So if somebody's right to life is deprived, then one has the right to die. It's not based on any other article. It's 21. The 19 is more about.
Sushil ji is available. Our senior advocate, Mr. Sushil Kumar Jain, has also joined, and he will be able to say something about that, because I have not read that Aruna Sonpal's case, what they have decided in that case.
Sir, we are basically arguing Article 25. We have a right to die peaceful life at the last end of my life.
Right, yes, Article 25, yes.
Yes. Now the question is, what are the rights? The basic element of Article 21 is the Sanlekhana or Santara are the element of our religion. It's a religious right and is a basic element of the religion.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, because in number of cases, in Muslim Bakram Eid matter, and there are number of matters.
Even in
And
Sati
in the
Pratha
recent that Bangalore matter also, everywhere they say it's not part of religious right. So what we have to do, we have to brought this in the category of
Article 25.
Article 25, to the extent that is a elementary part of the religion. That is the basic question which we have to decide. And we have to concentrate on the aparigraha, because right from the very first birth, we are doing aparigraha. And our religion is different from the body.
Right.
are the,
Okay. So I think.
so therefore we have
Go ahead.
to decide and fall within the parameters of elementary element of the religion. Unless we fall in that, 25 will not be attracted. Otherwise, these are actually what has happened, sir. In our country, basic problem is, this problem arose because of overemphasis. People conduct all these acts just to show off. They are not doing it by their own wish. Just in the last, all right, you take Salekhna, in the last you take all this Santara, and you stop taking food, you stop taking this. So this is being, you know, in the society, they just want to show up. And the show up is creating a problem. Then it leads to others to commit suicide.
I see. Mhm.
That's the person who is committing, and after, because of taking lesson from this, he is not doing because of religion. He is doing just to show up. And sometimes the relatives also misuses it. The difficulty is, what is the distinction between use and misuse?
Right.
That is the important aspect. I'm sorry I did not join you earlier and lost good part of your speech. I'm very sorry for that. I could get the link on the last moment. In the earlier, there was two links. In the first link, there was no link. So I thought there is no link. Then the second part, there was a link.
I see. Okay, so in the first part, what I did bring in, I think it is Article 21.
Can you send your speech in writing to me so that I can
oh,
use,
yeah.
I can
I have
use
the
it for my preparing my return note.
Well, I was hoping to present this as a amicus curiae in the case if it comes before the Supreme Court. So I do have this is a chapter that I have developed in anticipation of being called. I think Professor Rajmal Jain and Sugan Jain have said that they would like me to come as amicus curiae for this case. So I can make some of these cases as an independent person outside of the community. So because I'm not a Jain person, and that might carry some weight because the court want to hear solid.
The second thing we can also do it. It is prevalent not only in Jains. It is prevalent in almost all the communities.
Yeah, but you don't have to worry. You don't have to make a case about all the communities. They don't worry about it because then you see sati comes in and human sacrifice and so forth.
No, sati was a different. Sati is a burning herself on the lap of her husband.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that you're not going to make your case stronger by saying that other communities practice that. I think the case has to be...
That is only confined to women. Sati is only confined...
Right. Well, whatever the case might be, your strongest case is on Article 21. I think we were confusing 21 with 25. 21 is the one about the right to life and livelihood. 25 is really the religious freedom, the freedom to religion and practice and so forth. And then 19, of course, is about the liberties of individuals to make choices and so forth. So, you go from 19 to 25, you need those articles for this case. And then some support from euthanasia. I'm not saying that this should be classed as euthanasia, but I think rather than bringing support from other communities within India, because there's no legal, moral, bioethical sanction just because it's practiced. Just because something is practiced does not make it legitimate.
This is only for the purposes of showing others.
Yeah, okay, you could bring that in, but I think the strongest case to be mounted is Articles 21 to 25 and
The 21
and
21 is read against us.
whatever it is, we can look into it. I do have it set it all out. It's the religious freedom, practice the right to practice and gather.
What is their argument? Their argument is under Article 21, you are forcing somebody to commit Salekhna under force. Once the element of force is there, then it just becomes an attempt to suicide or
Yeah,
even death.
yeah,
So
okay.
that is the problem. So
Yeah,
therefore,
I see.
Article 21, we have to little bit mold it in a way
Yeah.
that this is I am doing it voluntarily.
Right, right. So
The difficulty arises. What is the stage, whether it was voluntary or not voluntary?
yeah,
It is
Yeah.
a question of fact.
yeah.
Once it becomes a question of fact, then it becomes a trial.
Right. But you see, this is why I think the arguments for euthanasia are helpful, because euthanasia does recognize non-voluntary in the cases where somebody is not able to make the judgment. It's not coercion. It's actually, there's a difference between active, passive, voluntary, involuntary. None of these involve coercion. So the people who are making this argument that there is a coercion involved are using it to their advantage, but they're blind to the fact that in medically assisted practices, there can be an outside intervention by the doctors, by the medical people and so forth, and it's not coercion. It's not involuntary either. It's in a sense of non-voluntary, or there is a directive principle left behind by the person who is in comatose. It doesn't become coercive just because of that. So you see, what's happened is that people are not acquainted in India with a whole gamut of arguments that have been made on these matters. And they're just going by, really what they're going by is Section 306. They're saying this is coercive, this is abetment. And they're using 306, Section IPC 306, to undermine Article 21, right? That's so they are sneaking in Section 306.
My difficulty is, once it becomes a question of fact, then there is a problem. Then it needs a trial.
Right. Yeah,
So-
it does, but there's legal fact as distinct from, empirical.
I have to come out. That is not a question of trial. It's a question of my religion.
Well, I don't know that you have to go immediately that far. I think you can say that this is a question of moral fact. This is a question of ethical fact. This is a question of legal fact. It's not just empirical fact. It's not just.
I say it's a question of religious fact.
Under what provision are you going to be able to say under what provision? Which article are you going to invoke?
So
Because
ultimately, I will have to invoke Article 25.
right. Okay. So
And
in a secular,
because I have a right to die peaceful death. And
as far as my religion allows me to do that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And
so because in the last moment of life, we need, in the last moment of life, we need peace.
yeah,
And peace means that I want to be away. Just like what we perform. We leave all our relations earlier.
right.
Then thereafter we leave food. Thereafter we leave milk.
Right.
Thereafter we leave even water. So this is the stages according to our health condition.
Right.
We are just not leaving it because of any force.
Yeah.
Just like a person who is capable of eating, he can't leave eating.
Right.
He leaves eating when he finds that now he can't digest anything.
Okay, well, that's very good. I have only 10 more minutes because I have another commitment this morning. It's early morning. So perhaps we could move
So
to.
I request you to kindly send me a note, detailed note, so that I can use it in my note.
Sure. If you like, I mean, I'm often in India, so it's not a problem for me to come with you in this case, because the arguments that I'm making are a bit different to the one that you're making. So
You know, I understand. It's not that I am not understanding your argument. I have not even heard your argument properly because I came very late. So I have not been able to understand what are your argument.
I will send you my paper in that case. Yes.
I'm sorry, I've lost my opportunity to just hear your argument because I.
Okay, there are other Sanjeevji. There are other people who are wanting to ask questions, so we have to go through quickly. I'll give myself another 15 minutes, and then I have to be gone. Okay, go ahead. So please ask other participants who want to.
Yeah, I think this is very good discussion going on between you and Mr. Sushil Kumar Jain. And
So I'm not sure.
Could not get, but what I would request now, DC Jain Saab, and then we will go to the Jira Jain ji, who is also, and Ajay Veer Singh ji is also with us, so we will listen him. So DC Jain Saab, can you please?
Can you unmute and can I have the video?
Yes, you can now on your video also.
I have a medical issue to be discussed on this day. Medical issue is that there are certain terminal illnesses like motor neuron disease or the advanced stage of Alzheimer's dementia, where specifically it is advocated that the life support system may be stopped. But at times, when the decisions are taken, at that time, some researches are going on. And we find a life-saving technique is developed. Like, suppose somebody develops complete heart block, and we have a pacemaker, cardiac pacemaker, and the person is revived. He has a full life. Similarly, at present, like comatose patients, as Sri Bilboria ji was telling, that the person who is comatose, he can be assisted by the medical team to terminate the life. But now here also, we have a new technique being developed, that is the brain pacing. Now suppose we have the brain pacing developed, and we find that within 3 months period, we are able to introduce this technique as a life-saving device. So should we postpone the decision of dying peacefully, or should the medical people should refrain? This is my point of view. I would like to listen from Bilboria ji.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Yeah, no, these are important points. But you see, I mean, by and large, what I hear from medical professions is that the advances in medical technology, perhaps except in the exception of the ones that you mentioned, as prolonging life in ways in which people are left in a vegetative state. There is no improvement. There is no coming back. There's no turnaround. In large number of cases, the people are just put in palliative care basically and kept alive. So what is done both. It's extended life beyond normal morbidity ratios, and so people are continuing to breathe and brain functioning and so forth. But it's the quality of life that matters here, rather than being the capacity to continue living in any of these conditions. So these are how much more technology people are alive. Whether in
Thank you very much, Bilboria ji.
So, yeah. Okay, the next.
Yeah. So,
Was there another question?
Dr. Rashmi Mishra, you want to say something?
I see. Jiyoraj Jain says something.
Jiyoraj Jain.
Yeah, I keep hearing a woman's voice who's trying to say something, but it's not coming on board.
I'll take
Dr. Rekha?
Oh, yeah. I'll take 2 minutes.
Maybe Dr. Rashmi Mishra has something to say.
Should I? May
Too many voices going on. I can't
may I
follow.
take 2 minutes?
Please
Hello.
speak loudly.
Hello.
Boliye.
Can I put my point?
Please go ahead.
Sushil Kumar ji, our expert, legal expert, he was talking about Article 25. It should be a religious point. Now,
Yes.
we really in religion, we have got 6 conditions to be fulfilled to take Santhara. The first is the fellow should, doctor should satisfy that this is now nearing the end. I have lived 3 Santharas where doctors really certified that the probability of survival is not very much. You can take him at home. And then all these 3, they have taken Santhara. The recent one was in America. The fellow has brain cancer, and a team of doctors, they specified, okay, we can operate it, but then after operation only, we have to give some therapy, etc. But the probability will not be more than 1 year. So that fellow refused. I will not take any treatment, and he actually expired within 12 days or 13 days without allowing them to operate. Now there are 6 conditions. One is it should be at the fake end of the life. Means doctor should certify that the probability is very less. The second thing is it should be having permission from the society or from the acharyas. The third one is the fellow should not wish to die or to live. That is one aspect. Then he doesn't expect he will have worldly all the facilities, or in the next life he will have some better facilities, etc. That he doesn't wish. The 6th one is he doesn't want to enjoy life any more further. So all these 6 things are specified in a religion. So probably the Article 25, as Sushil Kumar ji has told, this can be presented as a legal aspect. That is what my viewpoint is. Probably give your comments on these 6 points.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. In the early papers that I did, those are the points when I was covering exactly the practice itself from within the Jain perspective. I cover all of that. I'm aware of the conditions, and perhaps even rather there are patients which are different in individuals. No, I totally acknowledge that. The question is sufficient to convince the bench that they fall under Article 25.
What I am saying is aparigrah is a part of our principle.
Yeah. No, yes. So whether you mention that or whether we
aparigrah means we leave all comfort slowly and slowly throughout our life. Every year we are performing vrat, upvas. We are performing. Our child, even the age of 1 year, he is sometimes on the Anant Chaturdashi, he is not taking any food. So right from the birth almost, we are leaving certain things. So we are in the habit of leaving all important pleasures of the life from the very beginning of our life.
But you see,
Aparigraha is an important subject we can touch.
but with all due respect,
These are only the ways we can just justify. We have to justify otherwise there is no reason how to justify it.
you see, these arguments were all made in Rajasthan by people who came in defense. The question is, our judges.
But Rajasthan judge was a Sindhi judge, and he was intentionally not accepting anything. He has not considered any argument because our lawyers were not even present.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But remember that, when a judge is sitting on a bench, they have to put on the hat of a secular, except for some of the articles in the Constitution, which, with amendments and so forth, have almost been eroded in many different ways.
We have to point out the mistakes of the judge. We can get some relief only by finding out some mistakes. Unless we could get some mistake committed by the judge, on the face of the judgment itself, we can get the relief. Unless we are not able to point out any mistake, we will not be able to get anything.
Good point. Good point. I think we have to point out that the judgment made in the Rajasthan High Court was made in error, was a short-sighted, and that proper pleas were not offered by the community in question, and by legal and scholarly experts. I mean, why was I not there? I've been writing and working on this since 1985, but all the wealth of material that we have collected, and Setar, but then Setar had passed away. But I used his work way back, both his books. So we have and my colleague Christopher Chappell, we've collected lots of material. There's 3 other chairs on Jain studies in America that are actually focusing. People in those chairs are focusing on this material. So there's a lot of work and a lot of scholarship being done, and we need to bring all of that, to the courts from within the Jain community, but from outside of the Jain community as well.
That's right.
And that's why I think it's important that we prepare a case in such a way that it looks solid. It can't be biased. It doesn't look like as if we just peddling the case of the community, regardless of the legal and the bioethical challenges that faced. So, with all due respect, we could take one more question, but I do have to be gone. None of the women, by the way, in the audience have said anything or asked a question. Is there one coming from the side of the female in the community? I would be very interested to hear, because it impacts differently gender-wise.
We have Dr. Rashmi Misra.
Rashmi Misra ji wants to ask, say something. Please go ahead. I would love to hear you.
Maybe Varsha Shah.
Varsha Shah. Go ahead.
Sir, I'm Mahavir Jain from Nagaland. I also want to raise some of my opinion and views.
I don't have much time, so please ask a question. You could give a talk at some other point. I would need to be going. I'm just taking a few very quick questions rather than viewpoints, if possible.
I want to say we are under Article 25. We are having religious right, and our religious right is from thousands of years. The Constitution
we've gone through this. We have gone through this. Let's not go back to is there some new point somebody can make? We've touched this already. No, but I'm really short of time, so please.
Can I?
Yeah, please. Ajay Veer Singh ji, please.
I am Ajay Veer Singh. Jain, and I also practice in Supreme Court. And I was in the Supreme Court room when the Honorable Court stayed the High Court judgment.
Right.
I remember distinctly that all the three judges were more than eager to stay the judgment. And I'm actually very happy that a non-Jain has made such a great objective analysis of the different dimensions of the issue. And you have really woken us up to the fact that what we are going to expect in the court from the other side. Dr. Dhawan is not going to be a small thing. We need to really prepare ourselves well to counter Dr. Dhawan. Now, I'll be very short. Two things I just want to tell you. Have you thought of this, that we collect some statistics that people who gradually give up things in their life, like Santhara starts right from your childhood. You give up onion, you give up potatoes, you give up non-vegetarian, you give up alcohol. That's how we give up things. And effectively, people who are practicing Salekhana and Santhara, they live much longer. They live healthier lives. Have you thought of that? Second thing, I want to tell you, I mean, I'm not going to insist on your answer right now. I just want you to ponder about that. Or if you want to say something, you can. And the other is that non-Jains at the fag end of their life, whether they are in the palliative care or they are in the hospital or they are at home, because of their organs not working properly, they naturally practice Salekhana. They give up food on their own. There's two things I just wanted to point out.
No, I appreciate your early comment about, and I would like to talk to you a bit more. Perhaps we could email your presence at the Supreme Court when this was stayed. I would love to document that. It's very, very important for my work. I would really love to. But yes, the apigraha, the giving up, the asteya, those things that are being practiced do strengthen the organs in the body, and so they're able to take the Salekhana with with a lot of wisdom and a lot of strength, no doubt about that. But I don't know about about the other case, non-Jains. Some people are very, very healthy. They respond very well to medications and technological treatment to prolong their lives. I mean, people here are tied to the machines and so forth, and are living up to 105 or so. Quite common actually. The death, the age of death, except during the COVID period, is actually gone up quite a bit among white Anglo-Saxon people in this country, not so much among immigrant or African American. Perhaps I'm not sure about the Hispanic people, but yes, they seem to respond quite well. But it's not the quality of life is what is the issue in most of these cases. So yeah. Well, what does it matter? Well, why does it matter that the Jains have good, strong organs and therefore they're able to?
No. What I say is that some kind of discipline with your food habits certainly make you live longer.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and the kinds of food you eat. So now there's a lot of emphasis on the organic food and also other things like yoga doing. So today is my regime of yoga, Pilates, and a whole lot of exercises that I do over the weekend.
What I was thinking was that arguing on Article 25 habits flip side also, that they can say that you are directly in contravention of the Constitution, certain other article or some other thing, some judgment. So we can go on a scientific line saying that Salekhana is not suicide.
Yeah, I think that is a very strong argument that needs to be made, don't worry don't worry about it not being euthanasia. It's okay. People should not be afraid of euthanasia. It's actually more acceptable practice in much of the country, much of the world now. So
the euthanasia already judgment is against us.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah, but there's no reason why the court can't overturn that. The Supreme Court can overturn the euthanasia judgment. Euthanasia. So you think that there was a judgment against euthanasia? I mean, why can't the parliament
limited.
pass?
Very, very limited.
But there can be an act of parliament that can, like
Then again, it becomes a question of fact. Once it becomes a question of fact, then the trial is important. Then we have to face the trial.
Okay, all right. So it's more complicated. Well, I would like more information on the judgment against euthanasia. I want to see on what grounds they made the judgment. Maybe there is a response that's possible.
Professor, you can share an email in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, sure. I will. Sanjeev ji has my. Everybody can ask Sanjeev ji my email for sure.
Then we can have that.
Yeah. So yes, I would like to see the. I'd like to see some more about euthanasia. I know that it's mostly been obiter dicta. I mean, they've mentioned it in passing, but hardly any case that I know where they actually have made judgment against.
Sabrimala judgment is against us.
Show me the judgment. I'd like to see what the judgment was and share that with me and exactly grounds on which they have made it. So it looks like as if we've now come. I must be going. I've detained you all very long as well. Unless there is a quick question, as I said, I'd like the female participants to say something as well, because that is important for since I'm speaking from America, and they will always ask who were the what was the gender balance in the questions that were being asked. Well, that's it's too bad. We've covered a lot. I have made notes. I'd like to be in conversation with folks on this. This discussion must go on. It is very important.
We'll take care of gender justice next time.
Okay.
We'll prepare the women. We'll prepare the women for the question.
So if you recorded this and if you put it on YouTube, that question will be raised somewhere. Indian feminists will raise that, let alone outside.
Our young people are not interested in religion, and the old people, they just go by traditions.
I see. Well, it's about time the young people did take interest, and about time women made their voice heard in this.
By traditions.
In this case as well. Well, because it does. There are Salekana has been practiced by nuns. So, what are they? Are there any extra conditions that women face or would like to share, or things that they might be concerned about in this matter, or they may be against this. They might think that this is an entirely male or patriarchal practice and so forth. As Indian feminists have said of sati, that it was a coercion brought about by the man, by patriarchal conditions and so forth.
Sati basically sati we can distinguish.
No. I'm just saying as an example, as an
I was also conducting sati matter in the when it was arose in Justice Lodha judgment, and I am very much aware about that judgment.
Right.
Sati is something on the part of husband. She commits.
Let's not argue about sati. I just said, as in the case of sati, there was.
If we got ourselves involved in sati, then we will be in difficulty.
No, you misunderstood me. I'm not saying we go down. I'm saying that what the Indian feminists said was that sati is a male-dominated patriarchal practice that has come down, and that women are the victim here. Now, I don't know if a Jain feminist, from
males are
female
also
side.
All our Munis are doing Santara.
Sure. So why aren't they not saying anything? Why are they not participating in this discussion? That's all.
They are participating, but they can't come in the court.
They
It's
what?
not a question of evidence. We are arguing on the legal side.
No. We are. But we are also arguing on the community, social, religious side. So there are as much participants. Why aren't they participants?
DK Bobra is there also from US. Bobra sir, you want to have some comment?
I'm sorry, but I must go. I have.
Yeah, just few seconds. Give us Bobra sir if you want to say something. He's a medical practitioner in US.
Well, we will do it next month. So we start one question or two. We will just talk everything next month.
So is Dr. Bobra saying something? Please allow Dr. Bobra to say something.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that it's a big topic, and one question will not help answer anything. So we'll just discuss everything in the next topic next month.
Right. So Dr. Bobra is going to take next month in June 15 on the similar topic, and I would request Mr. Pulmoria ji also to be present there on 15 June if possible, and then we'll have this discussion going forward.
Yeah, I don't know where I will be in Europe 15 June, but let me see. I should be able to participate. Being in Europe makes it time. Yes, I will.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much, and I thanks Justice Abhay Goyal Sahab also for conducting this chair session during the session, and Advocate Sushil Kumar Jain from Supreme Court joining this conference, and we will have also another conference on 15 June. I would request to be there, and Dr. Ajay Singh ji, who is also with us, and thank you so much to all of you, and SM Jain Sahab, Mahavir Jain ji from Nagaland, Dr. DC Jain Sahab, Varsha Bobra Sahab from US, and so many people join us. Akshat Jain ji is there. Thank you so much. See you on 15 June. Jai Janendra.
Jai Janendra, thank you very much. I enjoyed that, and I hope we can continue this.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Jai Janendra.
Jai Janendra.